Today we're going to dive into one of Britain's greatest murder mysteries. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. In 1943, four young boys headed into Hagley Woods to look for bird eggs. Apparently in 1943, this was really common for young boys to do. They would go, they would get the bird eggs, and they would be paid for this. As the boys are doing their thing in the woods, they're looking for these bird eggs, they come to the hollowed out trunk of a wych elm. As the boys are looking through this emptied out hollow trunk, they come across a skeleton. Of course, they run and they get help, and detectives would soon come to realize this case was incredibly strange. The body of this person was in the tree and it was a full skeleton, except the left hand had been cut off and buried elsewhere. The pathologist determined that it was a female who had at least been dead for 18 months, and because there was irregularities in her jaw, they really thought they would crack this case very quickly. So they really set out to identify this woman, and they had tons of dentists come in and look, even nationwide. And nobody could identify this woman. A well-respected anthropologist at the time, Margaret Murray, gave her opinion on this case. This professor would startle everyone with the claim that this was a black magic execution. The professor would say this was definitely done ritually, and that the fact that they enclosed this body in a tree meant that it would be unable to haunt its murderers. And they did this ritual so that this woman couldn't haunt them. That was the whole idea behind this. And then suddenly, graffiti would start to appear, and someone wrote, "Who put Bella down the wych elm?" This started first in Birmingham, and then it just started spreading all over the place. But police really didn't have any leads. They didn't know who this person was. They were unable to identify her, so really they didn't have anything to go on. A few years later, in the 1950s, a newspaper article would claim that the woman in the tree, Bella, was a German spy. Police at the time were like, no, this isn't the case. That's not what happened. This was a murder. We don't really know anything, but we do know that this was not a spy. But then a few years later, files became public. In those files was evidence of a German spy ring. Evidence of a German spy ring operating in that area came to light. In these files, apparently there's a picture of a well-known German actress. The woman in the photos was known as Clara Belrol, a German agent known as Joseph Jacobs, who was put to death in the London Tower, had parachuted into Cambridgeshire in 1941, but broke his ankle on fall. He would be arrested shortly after. Authorities would find a picture of Clara on him, and apparently this was his lover. Joseph Jacobs would say that she was being trained as a German spy and that he did make contact with her, so chances are that she was in England. But there was no evidence that Clara had ever been in England at that time, and Clara was reportedly about 6 feet tall, while Bella was about 5 feet. In September of 2016, they were able to determine that Clara had died in Germany in 1941.
Conclusion. In 1943, four boys were hunting in Worcestershire, England, when they made a grisly discovery: the skeletal remains of a woman lodged inside a hollow tree. Her hand and shin bones were buried nearby, but since dental records didn't match anything on file, the case went cold pretty fast. However, it became the subject of much speculation once graffiti started popping up around the area that read, "Who put Bella in the wych elm?" There were plenty of theories as to who Bella was, with many claiming the murder had something to do with witchcraft. However, in 1953, a mysterious informant made a different claim, that the woman had been killed by a German spy ring that had set up shop in the British Midlands. Far-fetched crazy talk, right? Well, maybe not. The theory, supported by declassified documents, says that a German actress and cabaret singer named Clara Barol was the lover of a Gestapo agent named Josef Jacobs. Upon being arrested in 1941, Jacobs told British intelligence that Barol was also connected to the Nazi Party. Photographs showing Jacobs and Barol together proved they knew each other, and the up-and-coming actress disappeared after 1941. Was she also recruited only to meet a grisly end? Jacobs, who was the last person to be executed at the Tower of London, was definitely real, so is it possible that the mysterious remains are from a Nazi spy? Most certainly. Unfortunately, we'll likely never know for sure.
So let's take a step back and go back to this professor who claimed that it was witchcraft and black magic. Professor Murray would say that Bella was killed by gypsies who were performing a ritual. Of course, this is 1945. People jumped on this idea. They were absolutely certain that the professor was right. And because of the oddities of this case, of course, people are going to be consumed by it. This woman was put into a hollowed out tree trunk. Her left hand was cut off and buried elsewhere. And they also found taffeta inside of her mouth. And taffeta is just a material. So maybe somebody tore off a piece of clothing and stuffed it into her mouth. So they assumed that she died by suffocation. They had measured the tree, and the person doing the autopsy said that shortly after Bella was killed, they put her in the tree trunk, that she was, quote, still warm. Because if rigor mortis had taken effect, she would not have been able to fit in there. So they believe that she was murdered and then stuffed right into that tree while her body was still warm. But there are other theories about what happened to Bella. A radio broadcaster suggested one of two theories. He believed that either Bella was a sex worker who had been reported as missing to the police. In the report, it stated that the sex worker was known as Bella. This person worked on the Hagley Road and had disappeared 3 years previously. He also stated that the person who put Bella in the Wych Elm more than likely was responsible, suggested that the graffiti artist was aware of the identity of the victim, meaning that person could have been the killer or at least had known about the crime. And in 1953, a woman would give a statement to the police, and she would say that she believes her husband and another man were responsible for the crime. Una Mossop would say that her ex-husband, Jack Mossop, confessed to family members that he was the one who put the body in the tree. He would say another man, known as Van Ralt, helped him to do so. Apparently, the two men were at a bar in Hagley drinking, and they somehow met a woman. The men would take this woman in the car with them, and as they were driving, she would pass out because she was incredibly intoxicated. So they hatched a plan to put her in a tree in hopes that she'd wake up the next morning incredibly frightened and terrified for her life. They said they did this to show her the error of her ways and that she shouldn't be drinking and that she was a vulnerable woman type of situation. And Una wouldn't come forward with this information until 10 years later, which doesn't fully align with the facts because this woman did have a piece of cloth stuffed into her throat. Jack was eventually put into a mental hospital, and it was because he kept having reoccurring dreams about a woman in a tree staring out at him. But he died in the hospital before the body was ever found, and his ex-wife wouldn't come forward for 10 years. Bella was never identified, and her killer did remain at large. But that might change because a professor at Dundee University looked at photos from the time of the case and was able to reconstruct her face. She was unable to use Bella's skull, and that's because nobody knows where it is. A spokesperson for West Midlands Police would say, "Searches have been conducted by police museum volunteers, and they have confirmed that we have no exhibits and can find no documentation that may relate to this case at either of the West Midlands Police museums. Additionally, searches were carried out by our Force Records team, who have confirmed that there is no relevant documentation held with Major Investigations team or in external storage." After the face recognition was done, some people did say that this does look like Clara. I'm not sure I see it, but you can draw your own conclusions. Due to the work of detectives and forensic workers, they were able to determine that Bella was between 35 and 40 years old and had given birth to a child. They did say that the crime scene mirrored an ancient ceremony known as the Hand of Glory. The hand that had been cut off had been put 13 paces away from her body. Apparently, this was an ancient custom which was used when they executed witches. They would also say that because somebody identified her as Bella, it also relates to a plant known as belladonna, which is an ancient name for a deadly nightshade, and that plant was closely associated with witchcraft. This theory would definitely get more attention when a man was found murdered in 1945 on a nearby hill. He was found skewered to the ground with a pitchfork, and of course, everybody thought it was Satanism at work. I would love to know what you think about this case. Do you think it was aspiring? Do you think it was satanic? Do you think it was a serial killer? Let me know in the comments below. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.